Yes. Hello, 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 hello. Yes, good afternoon, student. Yeah. Before I begin, let me first of all give glory to God for His mercy, for His grace, for protecting us to be able to be here this afternoon. So, I'm going to start by committing all what we are going to do today into His hand. Of course, God is the one that provide wisdom, that give wisdom to His people. So we humbly ask Him to give us His wisdom to be able to understand what we are going to learn this afternoon. So, guys, I want to use this opportunity to revise with you the test paper that we did last year so that it can help you to be able to prepare for your test as well. So I'm going to go through and talk to the slides and provide answers to some of the questions that we got in the question paper. So we have different sections. We have section A, which is the multiple choice. So what you need to do is to read it and provide the correct answer to the question that was given or that was asked. Now the first one is, okay, let me read the instructions, which says section A, question 1. Various options are given as possible answers to the following question. Choose the answer and write only the letter A to D next to the question number that will be on your booklet. Right. So the first question here says, it outlines the requirement needed for the project. So when you look at the various options, you need to look for the right answer, right? For example, you have the project scope, you have the project charter, as well as the project plan. So you should be able to know which of these best described what was written above as far as the question is concerned. So the best one that fits in here, or the most appropriate one here, is the project scope. So essentially, the project scope is the one that outlines the requirements needed for the project. Now, the second question, 1.1.2, the difference between planned cost and the actual cost of a project is called what? A project have got a budget, which is the planned cost that is been earmarked, let me use that in my way, earmarked or set aside to do the project. So that is what we call the planned cost. In other words, you can call it the budgeted cost. What has been set aside or earmarked, if you will, if you want to use that vocab for the project, right, which is the planned cost. And the actual cost of the project is what it has taken you or how much it has costed you to do the project when the project is done. So at the end of the project, you need to do a kind of reconciliation to check or to establish if the planned cost was exactly is the same as the actual cost. Or let me put it this way so that you can understand it more clearly. You now have to check whether what you've actually spent on the project is exactly the same as the cost that you plan to spend on the project or is equal to the budget. So where there are differences, we call it variance. So the right word here is variance. Right. Okay, let's move. Then The third question goes like this: a technique where the project completion is rushed along by making use of more resources to complete the project activities is called what? So, in the course of a project, there could be a situation whereby you need to hand over the project or you need to complete the project more earlier than scheduled. For example, if the client or the sponsor of the project, they want the project to be delivered before time, perhaps when it comes to a situation, or if you come to a situation whereby the beneficiary of the project, they need that project to be done before time or before uh, the original scheduled time. So it might come to that kind of a situation whereby you need to hasten up. That is the literary word we can use there, hasten up the project in order for one to finish before time. In project management, we don't call it hastening, we call it crashing. Right. So invariably, what I'm saying here is the correct word that needs to be applied here is crashing. It's not decomposition. Decomposition is whereby you divide the project uh, holistically as it is into different tasks and activities. That is decomposition. Dividing project into workable packages. That is decomposition. So it's not decomposition. The right answer here is crashing. So you need to take note of that. Then the fourth question, as we have it here, it goes like this. The legislation put into action to promote equal rights in the workplace, irrespective of background and lifestyle. So the right one here is not freedom of speech, it's not labor relation, it's not right of property, it's Employment Equity Act, which has to do with the promotion of equal rights in the workplace. So the right answer here is Employment Equity Act, which is C here. Then the other question goes like this: using past experiences to successfully compile the budget of a current project. So, when you are compiling the budget of a project whereby you need to base your experiences on what you've done before. So we refer to that as historical data. Historical data. So the right answer here is historical data. It's not consensual estimate. Consensual estimate happens or it occurs where you have two or more people combining together in a way of cross-fertilizing ideas or bringing experts together or bringing their knowledge together to be able to estimate correctly, appropriately the cost of a project. That is what we classify as consensual estimating. So the right answer here is historical data. Then here comes a different pattern of question. We call this matching columns, whereby you need to match the correct answers in column B to column A or column A to column B as you may deem fit. Right. Here we said match column A with column B, write only the correct letter A to J next to the correct number 1.2.1 to 1.2.10. Right. Now, when you look at this question, you need to read what is in column A and match it with what is in column B. Right. For example, the first one here is decomposition. Decomposition, like I explained before, is a way of breaking down project into pieces or into manageable packages. I've explained that. So when you look at the options in column B, you will discover that the right one here that matches with uh, what is being asked in column A, which is the decomposition, is a C, right? So the decomposition is a technique used to break down the project into pieces. So that one is C. Now, let's look at the second one, which is 1.2.2. Here we have code of conduct. So you need to be able to conceptualize or know what code of conduct is. So when you look at the various options in column B, the right one is E, which is a set of rules used to create order within the workplace. In every workplace, there's a code of conduct which uh, is designed to regulate the behavior of people working in the workplace. So you got that there. Then you have this third question, which is talking about ethics. Ethics, right? Ethics is about a set of principles to determine right from wrong. That is what ethics is concerned about. So, which means the right answer there now is B. I mean, the right answer to question 1.2.3 is B. Now, let's go. We have 1.2.4, which is talking about forecasting, right? When you forecast, you are trying to estimate what is going to happen in terms of uh, each what is going to happen in future. So when you look at the different options here now, like I said, forecasting is about predicting. So the right option here now is predicting future costs. When you forecast, you estimate, right, the cost of your project based on forecasting the methodology. So you are predicting what the cost is going to be in the future. So that is what we mean by that. Now, the next question is project plan. Project plan. So a project plan 1.25 is about a formal detailed document of the planning of the project. It's where you set out how the project is going to be executed, when the project is going to start, and when the project is going to end. In a project plan as well, you have the various stakeholders that are involved, and also you include in your project plan, of course, the estimate of the project. You include also the contingency. You include also the detailed task that needs to be done. Everything that pertains to the project needs to be incorporated in the project plan. Right, we've got that. Then the next question is the spreadsheet, or no, the project charter. Right. The project charter is about a short description of what the project is about uh, to gain approval to initiate the project. Right. It's a short description about the project, and that is a kind of a document that you present to the stakeholders for you to be able to obtain the final approval. Then you have the spreadsheet. Right. The spreadsheet is you spreadsheet. We're talking about Excel now, right? So the spreadsheet is let's look for it. Okay, spreadsheet is a tool used to computerize budgeting. Okay, okay. So you can use a spreadsheet as a tool to tabulate, right, your budgeting, which is a tool used to computerize budgeting. Then we have as well here, what is it? The next one, we have time management, right? Time management. What is time management? What is it all about? It's about managing your schedule, scheduled time that have been allocated in executing the project. So the best one here, or the one that sound fit here is, let's look at it, that talks about time. Is a D, the process of managing the set times of activities to meet the deadline of a project. Right. Now, the last one here is the matrix organizational structure. You know, we have different types of organizational structure. We have matrix and functional, right? The matrix is the one whereby you report to one or two bosses, as the case may be, or one or two bosses giving you other directives in terms of what to do. So now let's look for the best one that suits, or that, so yeah, that the best answer here. We have an organizational structure whereby subordinates report to two managers. So now we've done with the aspect of the question. Okay, now let's talk about the other questions. Let's talk to this slide, which is about true or false. You need to state whether the following statements are true or false. Then you have question 1.3.1, which is talking about a checklist. Then what does it say? It says checklist is used to determine the timeline of the project. A checklist is not used to determine the timeline of a project, right? Yeah. We use a Gantt chart. So the answer there is false. Then question 1.3.2, which says a WBS can be used to determine the cost of a project, right? So what we are saying here is, you know what is a WBS? You know what is a WBS, right? A WBS can be used to set the base and determine the cost of a project, right? That is what they are talking about. Let me see what is happening. Why is this computer waiting? What is wrong with this thing? Right. So, is it moving now? What is wrong? Why is it stuck now? Okay. Yeah. Then, as we said, a checklist is used to determine uh, the timeline of the project. Like I said, we don't use a checklist to determine the timeline of a project. We use a Gantt chart. So that means that question is false. Then a WBS can be used to determine the cost of a project. Of course, you can use the WBS to determine the task or activities that needs to be done in the project as a baseline. Then from there you can be able to estimate. So it's part of it. By virtue of that, we can say this question is true. Then the procurement process involved the purchasing of items needed for the running of the project. That one is true as well. Then the next one is a Gantt chart is a project too suitable for every big project. This one, the answer is false. A Gantt chart is suitable for every type of project, whether big, small, medium, or whatever. So the answer to this, to the fourth one here is false. Then let's look at the last one, which says an expense claim form can be used to record any deviation during the project. You don't use an expense claim form to record the deviation of a project. So by virtue of my explanation, it means that the answer to that question is false. So yeah, let's look at this. This is a kind of a case study. Section B, which says, read the following case study and answer the questions which follows. Nice now school project, right? Nice now school project. Okay, let's see what the case study is all about. With just a few months to go for the completion of this new school at Kokadia in National, the progress of construction is looking really good. Atuba Construction is pleased to announce that the team is hard at bringing this project to completion, and soon the local community, together with the educators and learners, will be able to enjoy the fruit thereof and positively contribute to the development and growth of future leaders. Here you have the client stroke employer, Western Cape, Department of Transport and Public Works. Then you have the scope of the project, which is about the construction of a single and double story school in National, complete with classrooms, ablutions, admin block, parking, and sport field. Then you have the contractor selected to build the school is Atuba Construction. So the purpose of this project is to uh, provide, okay, there's a school facility, right? And there's something that is running short here in terms of the scope. So in terms of the planned cost, which is the budget is 83.9 million rand, as the case may be. So that is the case study. Now we need to look at the associated questions. Right. Question 2.1. It says, what is the vision of the National School Project? All right. So I just paused a little bit because we've got a lot of noises coming from outside. Okay. Now let's go. It says, what is the vision of National School Project? Right. So when you look at the case study in terms of what the vision is all about, is to provide the educational facilities in terms of providing the building, classroom uh, the for national school. What is the name of the school? Right? You need to reflect the name of the school. Right. National School Project. Okay, though the name is not there. Okay. So it's to provide a learning facility, providing buildings, right? And the project together, okay. Atuba Construction is pleased to announce this working bring the project as soon as together with the educator and be able to enjoy the fruit thereof. Okay. So it's about providing learning facility in terms of building school projects to the school, you know, whereby one can be able to learn, or the people of NISNA, as the case may be, the children can be able to learn in a conducive environment, right? Then identify the budget of this project. So the budget is well stipulated here, which is 83.9 million. Then explain what is meant by fixed cost and variable cost. Then you give the example of each cost. So in terms of fixed cost, it's a cost that remains the same, that doesn't change irrespective of production or irrespective of the activities that are being conducted in the project. Then the variable cost is a cost that fluctuates, that do change as per the volume of activity or volume of production. So you are asked to give example, right? Uh, so Okay. So if there are certain tasks or activities in the project that doesn't change as such, then you can give that one as example. For example, we can talk about rent. Rent in its own case, it always remains the same. Then you can give an example of rent as a fixed cost. Then for the materials or for the variable cost, one can give an example of the cost of material or buying the materials as a variable cost. Then they said 2.4, identify three stakeholders that can be involved in this project and describe the role of each stakeholder. So when you look at the case studies, then you should be able to identify correctly three types of stakeholders that could be involved in the project. So when you look at it, obviously, for the fact that it's a school and the school is being built in the Western Cape, which tells that obviously the Department of Western Cape Department of Education is involved or could be taken as one of the stakeholders there. Then you have Western Cape Department of Transport and Public Works. Of course, the people in the community of National stakeholders. Then you can mention as many stakeholders as you can. Okay, the teachers, the learners, all are stakeholders as far as this project is concerned, right? And what roles are they playing, right? For example, now the learners, they are the beneficiaries, right? And the Department of Education, what is the role of the Department of Education? It must make sure that whatever facilities that is being provided is conducive to learning, right? It should be in a position that is habitable, that will not constitute a kind of a hazard, you know, to the learners. So the place must be in good condition. It should be designed in such a way that is conducive for learning, or as a learning uh, platform or a learning environment. Then, what is the next question? Okay. So, in terms of the role of the department, again, they must make sure that the necessary associated facilities must be there, to be able to, for such facility to provide whatever services that it needs to provide. Then calculate the variance. Okay, let's look at this. They say assume that the contractor require 4 laborers at a rate of 325 rand an hour. The laborer are required to work for 10 hours. Calculate the total cost. Right. So if the contractor require 4 laborers at a rate of 325 an hour, and the laborers are required to work for 10 hours. So that one is, let's see how we can calculate it. Okay. Assuming that the contractor require 4 laborers, all right? You say number of laborers required, 4, right? Then the rate per labor equals 325, right? Then they are working for how many hours? Hours of work equals 10 hours. So, right. So for one labor equals 325 times 10, right? Which is 3250. Therefore, for therefore, 4 laborers equals 3250 times 4. Right. So that will give you the answer. You have a calculator here, so I don't let me see if I can calculate it from my laptop. I don't have a handy calculator here. Let me see. 3250 times 4. Calculator. 3250 times 4. Yeah, which is, yeah, which is 13,000. Yeah, correct. Here you have 13,000. So that will be the answer. For the four laborers working at a rate of 325 rand and altogether working for 10 hours. Right. So that is how to work that calculation. That is how to work it out. Then let's look at the other questions. 2.6. Study the following table and answer the questions which follows. You have item, planned cost, and the actual cost. Like I explained to you before, planned cost is the budgeted amount that one has estimated that the project is going to uh, consume, right? The money set aside for you to do the project. Like I said, before you can embark on any project, you need to sit down and work out how much is it going to cost you. It's even in the Bible that before a builder set out to build a house, the builder must first of all sit down and work out how much it's going to cost, to avoid a situation whereby the project gets halfway and the money finished or the resources that supposed to be utilized to complete the project are not there. So you need to work it out before you set out in doing the project. That is the planned cost, the budgeted cost, right? Then the actual cost is what was spent on the project. So, like I said, at the end of the day, you need to sit down and do a kind of reconciliation to reconcile to see whether the planned cost is equals to or is equals to the uh, budgeted cost, or the planned cost was equals to the actual cost. So, in a situation where the planned cost is different from the actual cost, we call it variance. So, it's something that one really needs to look at. It's very important as far as the execution of a project is concerned. For example, you imagine a situation whereby the actual cost is escalating more than the planned cost. So it might also result in a situation, most especially, it become very much precarious if it gets to a situation whereby the money got finished and there is no extra money left to execute the project. That is why in most cases you have instances of project being abandoned. So it's not a good news. So one must be very careful, right? Careful in the sense that when you are estimating the cost of the project, you should take into consideration all the necessary things that needs to be taken care of, and you must make sure that it's as realistic as possible. And when you are executing your project, you must also make sure that you are cost prudence. You do cost planning and cost control and all the necessary things that needs to be done to control the cost to make sure that at the end of the day, the actual cost is not quite different from the planned cost. So now let's look at the table. You have the planned cost and the actual cost. So let's look at the cement as an item. So 50,000 was planned, and what was spent is 39,500. So you see, in this scenario, what was spent is less than what was planned. So there's a kind of a savings here. Then look at the equipment hire, right? 30,000 was earmarked, was planned for the hiring of equipment. So at the end of the day, 32,000 was spent. So there's a kind of a variance here, which you can see it will not be a good news, of course, because you now spent more than what you planned for. Then look at the questions that follows. It says calculate the variance for the procurement of cement and equipment hire. So you can be able to calculate the variance here. How do you calculate the variance? Say planned cost minus actual cost. So you shouldn't forget about the implications as well, right? If it is negative or positive, it has to be reflected. So you need to know how to do that. Right? Like I said, in terms of the cement, you see, there's a kind of a savings here, which needs to be mentioned, right? But look at the one for equipment. There's a kind of a shortfall. So those things need to be taken into consideration because got its own implications as far as the execution of the project is concerned. Then look at this question. What is the difference between over budget and under budget? Right. What is the difference? Over budget. So if the actual cost is less, you will have a situation whereby the actual cost, this machine is having a problem and let me see why is this thing freezing? What is happening here now? All right, okay, so like I was explaining, like as I was explaining, we have over budget, right? Then under budget. So like the way it's being written, right? Over budget, right? Under budget, over budget. It means your actual cost now is beyond what was budgeted for, right? Then we call it over budget, right? For example, now when you look at this equipment, what is happening here? 30,000 was set aside in terms of the planned cost. Now the amount that was eventually spent was 32,000, which is over the budget. Then under the budget, you see, in terms of cement, 50,000 was planned, and eventually 39,500 was spent. So at the end of the day, we could say that that one is uh, under the budget. So that is how to explain that. Then we've done that. Okay, let's see the other question. Just a minute. Okay. All right. Now, question number 3. Okay, system start now. Question number 3. Okay. We have something of this nature. Assume that the project has come to an end and the project manager is about to have a feedback session. Create a lesson learned template in your answer book, right? then consisting of five questions relating to the experience of working on this project. Okay, let me show you an example of what we are talking about, right? The typical example of a lessons learned template. So you have something of this nature. So this is a kind of a lessons learned template that you are required to formulate. Um, okay. So a lessons learned template always come at the end of the project. When you've completed the project, now you want to establish in terms of what went wrong and what you were able to, or the things that you were able to do right as well. Because you need to consider both right and wrong, right? For example, in areas where you were able to achieve uh, much positively, then you keep your good practice and any forthcoming project, those good practices can be replicated. So in areas where you could not perform well, then you have to ask yourself what went wrong. You need to do a kind of diagnostic so that next project or any other forthcoming project that you'll be embarking on, you should be able to learn from your previous mistakes and improve on it. So that is one of the most important aspect, or what and not one of the most important things that one needs to learn about in terms of we learn from experience. So one should be able to compile kind of a lessons learned template. So what are the things that needs to be reflected or to be contained in the lessons learned template? It's something of this nature because you have to look at the project holistically. It's a kind of evaluation. You evaluate the project in terms of your achievement and where you feel you haven't achieved much and try to compare and see what went wrong. Then you draw up a conclusion based on that. So eventually, you need to come up with a lessons learned template, which is going to be in this form. So it depends on the context and it depends on the project as well. So this one is based on this project. So it goes like this. Then there must be a date on which the lessons learned template was compiled. Then the project manager, of course, name must be there. Then the project name, of course, it has to be there. Then these are some of the questions that can be posed, you know, in the compilation of a lessons learned template. For example, what did you enjoy most about the project? One needs to know whether one was able to enjoy the project and identify specifically what one was able to enjoy about the project. So that one needs to be written, right? Then what did you find most challenging about the project? One needs to look at the project holistically and see the various challenges that were faced so that in future one should be able to uh, devise means of overcoming such challenges. Then were health and safety protocols successfully put in place? So it's a kind of a question that you need to probe or that is probing project to see if such were in place and if such were in place and for future projects how this could be rectified. Then did all the equipment and material arrive on time, in terms of time management, in terms of procurement, all these things needs to be asked to probe the system of procurement to see whether the system was effectively done. If not, why not? Right? So those are the type of questions you need to ask. And lastly, here, where inspection criteria met, inspection criteria, right? This one has to do with the standard that has been set and the various mechanisms that were instituted to enhance or to monitor the quality standard of the project. So this one has that responsibility of probing into that in order for ones to be able to uh, establish whether what has been done or done in a proper way towards the enhancement of the project. Right. Okay. Where were we? Let me see. All right. Now, 3.2. Give any two examples of techniques that can be used by the project manager and the project teams. Right. Remember in the class we've discussed about this. We talked about techniques as well as tools. Right. We say tools are devices being employed by the project manager in managing the project or enhancing the management of the project. Right. Being used by project managers to uh, manage the project. It's a kind of uh, assisting the project manager in doing what he needs to do in managing the project or in executing uh, his administrative or leadership functions in running the project or executing the project or managing the project in managing the project team. Let's put it that way. So we've got different types of tools, right? For example, we have a tool like the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart, of course, used by project manager to manage time, to manage the schedule of the project. Then we have a tool like the WBS, the work breakdown structure, which tends to arrange hierarchically the various tasks that needs to be done in the project, right? Whereby you need to first of all start by breaking down the project into manageable packages. So those manageable packages needs to be arranged in form of a tree, a hierarchical structure. Whereby, for example, you have the main task, you have sub-tasks, sub-tasks, and all the associated tasks that goes along with it. So it's a kind of a tool that is assisting the project manager as well to be able to identify holistically what needs to be done in the project as far as the tasks are concerned, the activities are concerned. So it's a very important tool. Then you have a spreadsheet, of course, like as we said, it's a computerized system that can be used in assisting in making budget, in cost control, and cost planning. Right. So then we have what we call techniques. Techniques are procedures. For example, you have the brainstorming. Brainstorming is a kind of a procedure that can be utilized in generating ideas by the project manager. Then you have something like a collocation. Collocation is a kind of a technique that enhances team dynamics in a project. Then you have uh, techniques such as crashing, like I've explained before. We came across this at the beginning. Crashing is a process whereby you tends to reduce the duration of the project so that it can be finished before time. So those are good examples of tools and techniques Okay. Looking at this question, you've been asked to give two examples, right, of tools and techniques. So that is what you need to mention or to identify as far as question 3.2 is concerned. Then you have question 3.3, which says, explain how the project manager can exercise the following right while working on a project. Equality, right, by treating everybody the same, right? Treat everybody the same, then you can, by doing so, the project manager is exercising that right without uh, placing some other people to be of more importance than the others. Then human dignity, which has to do with respect, treating people with respect. Then you have 3.4. 3.4, we say list four project documents that can be used. List four project documents that can be used during the life cycle of a project. Right. We got different types of project documents as we have here. Let me show you. Project documents. Right. You have different types of project documents that can be utilized during the life cycle of a project. Right. Well, I want to show you something. Where is it? Right. Then you have, like what we have here, you have the project scope, which detail as what needs to be done in the project. You have the project charter document, like I said, that compile all the things that needs to be done in the project that one needs to put together for present to the stakeholder for an approval. Then you have the WBS, the work breakdown structure, the Gantt chart, the project plan. So all these things are the type of documents that are required in the project from the inception, from the initiation to the completion. Right. Then what else again? Name six components. Right? Six components that can be included in the project plan, right? I think I made mention of this when I was explaining the concept of a project plan, right? In a project plan, you must have the stakeholders because it's a document that contains everything about the project. The stakeholders must be there as one of the components. Of course, list of stakeholders because it's not only one stakeholder that is going to be involved. Then you have the budget, right? The cost of the project, what you've estimated, the planned cost, if you will, of the project. Then the contingencies must be there. Then the risk management plan must be there. Then the mission statement of the project must be there. Then you have, yeah, I said the contingency, then the stakeholder, the budget, right? Then the scope of the project must be there in terms of what needs to be done and all those stuff. So those ones constitute a minimum, constitute the component of a project plan. When we say component of a project plan, in short, what we are referring to is what constitutes the project plan, or what are the main elements of a project plan. or what can you find in the project plan, if you will. Right. Then explain two ways that the Gantt chart can benefit the project manager and his team. Right. Gantt chart is a very important tool for scheduling. You cannot execute a project without having a Gantt chart, right? A Gantt chart on its own is like a GPS, right? A GPS to guide the project manager in executing his job, in managing the project. For example, the Gantt chart states when the project needs to start and when the project needs to end. So it stipulates the deadline of the project. And you know, in managing a project, one must make sure that the deadline or the deadline is adhered to. You need to stick to the deadline. You need to stick to the time frame. Let me put it that way, to be more simple, right? You need to stick to the time frame because any attempt for one to go beyond the time frame or to go beyond the deadline has its own cost implications. So it helps one to manage the timeline of the project. It helps the project manager, let's put it this way, in managing the time as far as the execution of the project is concerned. Then another thing we can talk about is the allocation of responsibilities. It helps the manager, or rather the project manager, as the case may be, to allocate tasks and responsibilities to project team members. Besides that, it helps the project manager in monitoring the progress of the job done. So it's a very important tool that play a very prominent role as far as the success of a project is concerned, right? Or the management of a project is concerned. So that is that. Now let's look at this question, the fourth question, which says identify any four resources that the project manager and his team will require to successfully complete the Nice Now School project. Right. Resources are very important as far as the success of a project is concerned. Or to refine it more simply, resources are very fundamental. Or let me put it this way, resources availability is very important to the success of a project. So if resources are not readily available, or let me put it this way, if the right or the appropriate resources are not assigned or are not allocated to the team members to execute their job, at the end of the day is going to have or constitute a kind of jeopardy or compromise the success of such project. So, what do we mean by resources? Resources are the things that are needed for one to be able to execute the project. So, we've got different types of resources. We've got what we call or what I may call generic resources or generic resource. So what do we mean by generic resources? These are resources that are required to execute a project irrespective of the nature of the project. For example, money. Is there any project that doesn't involve money? Of course. All projects do involve money. So money is a generic resource. Okay. So in terms of resources, to unpack it in this context, we are referring to the things that are needed for one to be able to execute this project. For example, we need the materials, right? Building or constructing the building, a classroom building or whatever it may, needs the requirement of materials. For example, cement, block, and all those kind of stuff. Right. But when you are asking the exam, for you to list the resources, don't go as far as say cement, block, and sand, stones. No. we can classify those ones as materials, right? Then we say materials needed. Then we talk about the capital, which is the money how that is involved, obviously, it's a resource. Then you talk about the labor, people that need to wait there. It's a resource as well, right? Without people to execute the job, without people, the team member to do the job specifically, how is the jobs going to be done? So you need people. You need time as well. Time is a resource. Then you need knowledge, skill and knowledge, expertise for one to be able to execute the job. Right. So those can be classified as resources, as I've mentioned. Now, with that regard, let's go to question number 4.2, which says, give two reasons why you think document management is essential to the running of the project. Right. Here we are talking in terms of project documentation. Right. In a project environment, we got different types of documents. We got template, which are in form of template as well. For example, for uh, cost document or for yes, you have something like the voucher, the petty cash voucher, petty cash returns, right? Then we've got documents that relates to correspondence for communication. You have email, right? You have we don't talk about fax these days. Then you have a memo, a memorandum, or all those type of stuff. Then you got for equipment, you got equipment sheet for time management, you got time sheet and all this stuff. Many documents that are essential for the successful execution of a project. So this document needs to be managed in such a way that one can be able to retrieve any document that is being required at any point in time. So it can help one to be able to retrieve or to, for example, in accounting, there's what we call a audit trail, whereby you can be able to trace costs to its original source. So if the documents are not being managed, so that will not be able, one will not be able to achieve that. So it can act as a kind of a reference or an evidence as the case may be. For example, like contract document and all those stuff. So there might be situations whereby one is required to produce those documents. So if they are not in place, that could compromise the success of such project in terms of credibility and integrity. Right. Now, where, where are we? Give two reasons why. Okay. Then assume that one of the project team member breached the code of conduct. Describe the correct process that should be followed. Okay. Let me go into this. You can as well use your experience from, is it LO or management practice to answer that. They're more or less the same. This breach code of conduct. On this. Okay. All right. In terms of the processes that needs to be followed. Can you find this? Okay. Okay, in terms of the processes that needs to be followed. For example, that is what we call whistleblower, right? You know, when we have a situation of someone coming forward to report event or to report cases of wrongdoing or malpractices or not compliance or something that is not going well as far as the management of the project is concerned. So, in such a situation, one needs to investigate, right? That might be the first point of call. You need to investigate to establish whether that whatever that is being brought forward by the whistleblower is correct, because you don't have to say just take it the way it is and start victimizing whosoever that is being accused or alleged. So what you need to do is first of all have to establish, the truth of that statement, that whistleblowing statement. And once you've established that is the truth, then you need to call the person that have been alleged. Then you investigate to establish the fact of the case. Then in some cases, one can be issued a call for a hearing. Right. After the hearing, you discover that the person is guilty. Then you can give warnings. Like as we do, you have first warning, second warning, third one before you know the next line of action to take. And you could as well try to establish what is making that person to, or what has made that person to commit such an offense. Perhaps it could be because the way the system is or whatever. So those things needs to be established. And there are some cases whereby you need to look at the person or that have been alleged and try to see the circumstance in which uh, that offense was committed, and then see whether why that person committed such an offense. There are some cases whereby the person itself that committed such an offense have problem, a personal problem, which one needs to weigh in, come in and see how that person can be cancelled. All those kind of stuff needs to be done. So yeah, so when you read your books, then you will see more of how this case or the breach of code of conduct needs to be properly handled. Then you have the last question here, which says identify two limitations of inspection. You see, inspection is very important as far as ensuring the quality standard of a project is concerned. You need to make sure that you institute mechanism, for regular inspection to make sure that whatever is being done conform to standard. So what you need to do is in terms of inspection, as we said there, you are required to identify two limitations of inspection. Right. So one of the limitation of inspection is that it's expensive. It's not something cheap, because you need to uh, budget money for people to go out there and see that the performance is up to standard. That is one of the limitations. It's not something cheap. One needs to be paid in doing that. Then another thing is that there are many instances whereby the inspectors might not even be aware or might not even be proficient in terms of knowing what they need to do. In most cases, there are some cases like that. And what I'm trying to say is that, there are some inspectors that are not keen or not proficient, knowing much in terms of going out there to actually know what to do in terms of measuring or comparing performance with standard. We've got obvious cases like that, from experience, in many projects. Then we can as well mention that inspection on its own is time consuming. It takes time, So it's not something that you can just do within a twinkle of an hour or within a short space of time if you really want to do a proper job, proper inspection. So it takes time. So yeah, now we've given the three limitations. So these are what is required in terms of doing justice to this question paper. Right. So when you look at the mark allocation, it's, the section A, 20 marks, then the section B, 80 marks. So altogether 100 marks. So yeah, I'm going to stop here. And with this, I wish you the best. And in revising this paper, I know that you are going to have no doubt that you are going to learn much, learn a lot from this paper, and it will make you to be much more confident in going out there to write your exam. Thank you. All the best. Ciao, ciao.